Hello, everyone, and welcome. If you would, please put your name and where you are joining us from in the chat. We would like to know who's in the room with us today. Please put your name, organization, and location in the chat. We'd like to know who's in the room, where you're visiting from. We'd like to know who's in the room with us today. See, I'm going to start, and I am Shauna. Okay, hi, Paula. Welcome.
Thank you.
Mark from Chattanooga, Choo-Choo, Tennessee. All right. Okay, well, welcome. Welcome and Happy New Year, everyone. I'm Shauna Cooper, Director of Programs for Ribbon. And today we have an exciting webinar for you on strategic planning and partnerships. This webinar is being brought to you by This webinar is being brought to you by Ribbon, but it is funded by Gilead. So any ideas or information that is presented in here in this webinar are solely those of Ribbon. So again, welcome. Welcome to the webinar and welcome to 2023. Hope you all had an exciting new year, and that's what's before you is all that you could have possibly imagined, and that's for yourself and for your nonprofit organizations. Again, the webinar is Planning by Design. Where are we going and how do we get here? I have my co-host here, who is Kelly Stevens. She is the founder and CEO of Sahara Consulting, LLC. Some of you have met Kelly on other occasions. She's done strategic planning for our National Community Action Board and our 3 action groups, programs, communications, and policy. Next slide, please. So today we're going to talk about a few things. Core strategic planning, what constitutes strategic planning, those core elements that are involved or encompass strategic planning, benefits and challenges, why we need to have them, and what may impede us from moving forward with those strategic plans. We're going to talk about how you can assess your organization's readiness to start strategic planning, and why you should invest in mutually beneficial strategic partnerships. So strategic partnerships are not just for one party, but they're for all parties involved. So if you would, please put in the chat, I know you already put your name, where you're from, and your organization, but why are you here today? Just real quickly, and I'm going to turn it over to my co-host, which is Kelly. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Shauna. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I think it's afternoon pretty much everywhere. It's so nice to be in this virtual space with you all. As Shauna mentioned, we're going to be focusing on strategic planning. And so we're going to jump right into it. But I know folks might be adding just a little bit into the chat. So I'll give folks just a minute to share kind of what they're hoping to get out of today's session.
I'm so sorry, Kelly. Real quick, I forgot to note that caption is available for anyone who needs to use it. My apologies. I'm turning it back over to you, Kelly.
All good. Thanks for that. All right. So we're going to talk about strategic planning, y'all. We're going to talk about strategic planning. I see some folks are looking to engage in strategic planning. There might be different degrees of familiarity and comfort with strategic planning. So before we jump into the meat of our presentation, let us do a quick poll. So I'm going to ask that we bring up the poll. And the poll is asking folks, have you engaged in a strategic planning process before? Yes, no, or unsure? Yes, no, or you are unsure. All right, this is exciting. Give you another minute or two to let us know where you are, where you're falling. All right. So it looks like we got most people here have engaged in some form of a strategic plan before. Second by folks who have not engaged at 27%, and also a number of folks who are unsure, and that's perfectly fine, as we'll learn and talk a little bit about today. Sometimes just engaging in a strategic process and the ways in which different folks have moved that kind of effort forward hasn't always looked as or been as transparent as maybe it could be. So here are the results, and let's move it on in. Thank y'all for completing the poll. All right, so now that we have kind of officially begun to settle into the new year, you and your team might be thinking about what it means to map out what you'd like to accomplish and how you're going to get different things done in 2023. And if not, perhaps this webinar will help inspire you to consider what that might look for you, what that might look for your organization or your team. And so, although we don't have a ton of time together today, and as was mentioned, we will focus on strategic planning, we also wanted to spend just a little bit of time talking about some of the other types of plans that go into just organizational planning in general. Because there are, of course, opportunities and spaces where it makes sense to jump into a strategic plan, but there are also other types of plans that probably make more sense depending on what it is your organization is doing, and also what it is you'd like to accomplish within a given set of time. So as you can see here, there are 4 different plans that most planning processes, most plans fall into. And when we're talking about plans, I mean, you can probably name 1,000 different plans, from communication plans, marketing plans, human resource plans, finance plans. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that organizations have kind of pulled together and organized how they're going to get us something done, and through kind of the label of plan on top of it. But again, when we're thinking about all of the various ways that teams and organizations and groups put together a planning process, it more or less falls into these 4 buckets. So let's talk a little bit about it. The first bucket is the project or the tactical plan. So when we're talking about a tactical plan or a project plan, we're talking about plans that most folks are familiar with, right? This is a plan that just details how a team is going to accomplish very specific short-term goals or tasks. When you think about these type of plans, you can think about your work plans, the project plans that you have for the different grants or different other organization projects that you might be in support of within your organization. So it includes oftentimes process information such as your action steps, your resources needed, key performance indicators, intended outcomes, and timelines. What's also included here are like KPIs, right? So thinking about all the ways that you measure, all the ways that you organize, not only yourself, but members of your team, to ensure that you can very quickly get something done. So if you're putting together a new project, you've just been awarded a new project, you want to make sure that everyone's oriented with what needs to happen, when it needs to happen, you'd put together what's called a project or a tactical plan. Again, most folks are familiar with it. If you haven't done it, you might have been a part of it. And if you've done it, you probably don't necessarily want to think about it in this space. But again, very common plan. Most organizations are doing it. Most organizations have them. Next up, we got business plans. Business plans are often developed at the start of a new business. So when you're starting up a new business, it's often required that you state what your purpose is, what you're doing, why you're doing it, what you're hoping to accomplish, what success looks like for your business. And so when you're putting together a business plan, you're really thinking about kind of what's going on with how the business is situated. How are we doing what we're doing? As a established organization, you can also think about developing a business plan for to address rather specific issues that might be going on when it comes to how an organization is maybe facing and needs to navigate a specific kind of issue, right? So here we have that business plans are developed when finance related issues need to be addressed. So if there is any sort of instance where maybe, I don't know, there's like financial mismanagement, there is a audit inconsistency, you might want to consider engaging a business plan to ensure that there is a solid understanding of what all needs to be done, and then a specific kind of oriented way of engaging and addressing the operational issues that are impacting your business or your organization's ability to do the work. All right. Oh, I forgot one piece. When it comes to business plans, there's also an opportunity to develop a business plan when you're thinking about pulling together a new partnership. So if you as an organization or as a team are thinking, well, there's another group that might make sense to really kind of maximize the impact of the work that we're doing, then you might want to develop a business plan to really orient how we're in relationship with this other business. How do we work together? What are the rules? How do we do this to ensure everybody feels good about how we're building into our engagement here? Another type of plan is a contingency plan. I don't know if most folks are familiar with contingency plans, but contingency plans are usually developed when there's a need to consider kind of an alternative course of action or establish kind of a plan B. Contingency plans are often built when we're thinking about crisis management, when we're thinking about risk management. Something crazy has happened, or we know that there is a possibility that something really impactful can shift how we do what we do, or shift our ability to actually engage in this work. And so that can look like, hey, there is a strong chance that our organization will have to shut down during the hurricane season, because it's very likely that in our community, that's what happens to businesses. And so we need to develop a plan to really establish what it is that we're going to do in the event that this happens. Or it could be set up, or a plan rather could be developed because we want to, as an organization, make sure that we have a grounded approach for addressing how we are going to navigate the realities of our continued truth within this pandemic. So there's lots of different ways to think about risk. Risk can look like big environmental factors. Risk can look like, what happens when everybody on staff decides to leave? What do we do? How do we do this? What happens if we lose all of our funding? How do we do this? So thinking about the risks, known and unknown, known and perceived, and then developing a plan is what you would use a contingency plan for. And last but not least, we got strategic plan. So when we talk about strategic plans, and I mean, most of you already know this, but when we talk about strategic plans, we're really talking about defining and mapping out the future goals and targets for how your organization is going to function and how your organization is going to evolve. So typically, when we think about a planning process and the engagement of this specific kind of planning process, we're talking about building into a specific, realistic, time-bound plan or set of action steps to address the following kinds of organizational needs. Market needs, and those are kind of situated around like, how are we performing within the field? What's happening? How do we engage in ensuring that we're on top of what's happening? Have we been responsive to some of the changes in the field, right? And so thinking about the perspectives, the needs, the desires of our clients, our funders, our partners, those who have similar businesses or are structured similarly as our organization, as well as the broader community, getting a solid grasp of how folks perceive us, and also in general, have a solid grasp of whether or not this organization is accomplishing what it hopes to accomplish as it relates to some of the trends and realities of the existing market. Strategic plan also helps to create a better understanding of operational needs. Operational needs are really centered around what's going on internally, right? What's going on with staff? What's going on with recruitment, professional development? What does it look like and feel like for staff to be a part of this organization? And then also structurally, are we growing financially? Are we stable financially? So it creates an opportunity to understand not only what those needs are, but also what the opportunities are to continue to build or to stabilize if there is an instance where there's a need for that. And lastly, and this is often rather where people usually kind of ground themselves when thinking about strategic planning, that transformation piece. So when organizations are like, I'm ready to expand, we need to go ahead and incorporate a whole new way of doing stuff. It's time to change who we are. Maybe we need a new name. Let's just get creative and think about how we can grow and really solidly address maybe these needs or this new opportunity that's coming up. That's really where your transformation piece is centered, right? And thinking about what all does it mean for your organization to shift into a new entity? What would be required? What would make sense? Where are those gaps? So again, when thinking about strategic planning, it's not just the where are we going and what exists, it's also who are we solid? And also how are we engaging with the market? And also how are we positioned within our communities? So in thinking about kind of what goes into it, what's in a strategic plan, we can go into like the basis of how you engage in that process, but I want to direct us first to the box to the left. Before you start a process, before you think about building into your strategic plan and what all that will entail, it's really important to identify the purpose and the intended outcome. The reason for this is because when we're thinking about what is needed, when we're thinking about what we want to accomplish, it's important to ensure that all of the folks who are involved in that process, all of the folks who need to be a part of that process, including staff, board, and community stakeholders, are clear about what the intention is, why they are doing this. It's also important to establish that core planning team, to have owners, to have people who are going to shepherd the process. It's all too easy to say, we'll bring a person in, they're going to take charge, they're going to just do it, and then they'll let us know when they're done. But if you want to rather engage in a strategic process or a strategic planning process that really does leverage the expertise of staff, the expertise of community, and the insights of stakeholders, it's important to think critically about not only the establishment of that team, but who all might make sense to engage in this very important and transformational process. Next up is the allocation of resources. So that includes staffing resources. It's going to take time. It's going to take meeting time. It's going to take thinking time. It's going to take processing time. Thinking about the logistic, or that says logical, but means to say logistical, the logistical resources, right? What kinds of things are needed tech-wise? What kinds of things are needed in terms of the actual location? Do we have space for this? Do we have tech for this? And then the financial pieces. That also kind of some ways correlates with the staffing piece, but also is related to thinking about what all might be involved if you are, as an organization, looking to bring someone in to help facilitate and guide the process. And that brings us to our very last bullet around the consultant piece. Not every strategic planning process requires a consultant. However, as an organization, it might be the decision of those in a position to kind of break this down that everybody be a part of the process. And so in thinking about whether or not you want to bring on a consultant, it's important to consider the extent to which everyone can and should be a part of engaging in that kind of explorative dialogue around what is possible and what can be the next phase of how the organization engages in this work. So again, consultants are not required for the process, but they're certainly quite helpful in ensuring that not only you're moving the process forward, staying on task, but also to ensure that everybody within the organization and everybody who is brought in to support this process can contribute in a way that is equitable. So let's move on to the other pieces here. When thinking about elements, step one, we're talking about that environmental scan and analysis. Some folks are super familiar with this. Talking about environmental scan pieces, we're really just talking about when you do the work of figuring out what all has been going on. How are things organized within your organization? How are things set up in terms of how you build into your project work and your staffing structures? And then also in an environmental scan, you're learning about how people perceive your organization, how people you work with your organization perceive your organization, as well as how staff within the organization perceive your organization, how they perceive working, how they perceive the culture, and what they want to see for the future. So step one is really that assessment phase, getting a grounded understanding or acquiring a grounded understanding of what it is that's been going on and what folks feel is the next step or what folks feel should be prioritized when thinking about building into a strategic plan for the organization. The next step in a planning process is to develop the strategy. So once you get all the data from step one, and you have a grounded sense of what all people have said is helpful and important to know about this organization, how it operates, its positioning, and also kind of the ways in which people are in relation to it, you start developing the plan. What do we prioritize? How do we make sure, what's the timeline? Are we doing this right now? Are we doing this in 2 years? So really thinking about all of the things that are important to start now, all of the things that are important to start at some point, and then who will all make sense to lead or carry forward those different items. And then the final step, and just as important step, is step 3, which is the plan implementation and the plan monitoring. In this phase, we're really just talking about doing the things, moving the plan forward to implementation, right? And monitoring the impact and the accomplishments and outcomes of that plan, and ensuring that you are not only accomplishing the things that are outlined in the plan, but that if indeed there are things that are unanticipated, things that you didn't know, things that you are now learning, that you are building into a meaningful engagement of how that plan needs to be updated to reflect the kind of outcomes that you'd like to see. You'll see at the bottom here, when it comes down to like a strategic planning process timeline, it's hard to say. It really does depend on the purpose. It depends on the scope, and it depends on the resources, right? Do people have time to really sit down and do the work of engaging in these discussions every single week, once a month, etc.? So a strategic planning process typically takes anywhere from 6 months, and that's beginning to end, to 18 months to longer. I mean, I've seen organizations need realistically 2 years to build into a strategic process. For some, that might be a little too long, but think about what it is that you're trying to accomplish, thinking about what it is that you have the resources to be able to move forward. You can identify with, the solid core group of folks who are tapped in to build into this process, what a reasonable timeline and commitment to this process could be for your organization. So when should you consider strategic planning? When should you be doing this? Generally speaking, folks have probably heard the 3 to 5 year rule. And the reason why this typically pops up is because every 3 to 5 years, generally speaking, you'll find that there are major shifts in priorities when it comes to funders, when it comes to some of the bigger picture policies. So when you think about, if you're someone who is, or an organization rather, that's familiar with local and federal government, a lot of those grants are 3 to 5 year grants. And so when a new grant opportunity comes out from those same types of funders, it's not uncommon for the opportunity to have an entirely new set of priorities, an entirely new way of working. And so as an organization, it's a solid practice to, in the midst of these different changes that are anticipated from funders, from community, from policy spaces, to just engage in a practice of building into how your organization can continue to be responsive to and ground itself in an understanding of those shifts. Some other reasons to consider engaging in a strategic planning process include environmental changes. So we talked a little bit earlier about the realities of how the pandemic has impacted the organizations, or just kind of organizations in general, way of operating, way of being. Well, now thinking strategically about that, it's not really a contingency thing. It's really more of a, okay, well, what do we do? This is the reality of now. What does it mean for us to do this work? Where do we want to go, given the truth of how things have shifted? how maybe the office it looks different and feels different because most folks don't work in an office anymore. So building into kind of the strategy around some of the environmental changes that might be happening within your organization is another reason, or is a reason why people would engage. Structural or operational changes, leadership changes. Leadership changes here are specific to if you have a new ED. If there is a new ED that starts, it's not uncommon, a new ED or CEO that starts, it's not uncommon for there to be kind of a task on that new ED to think about how they can build into some new strategies for the organization. It's also not uncommon for that new ED to want to build into a solid grasp or understanding of what's going on and how things work, and generally how the organization does what it does in community or in response to some of the grant activity that they have. And a strategic planning process, by virtue of that first step, the environmental scan, helps to ground any new leadership in an understanding of that piece, and then also have it be the case that they can have it whatever strategies or kind of new planning or kind of new wave of energy around the direction of the organization be informed by how the organization needs to operate or best operates. If there's a new focus, a focus on a new priority population, that could be another reason. And then lastly, the launch of a new project that contributes to a significant percentage of your operating budget. So why is that significant? When we're thinking about a project that incorporates the need for, a project that contributes to a significant portion of your operating budget, chances are a good number of staff are going to be engaging in that work. And so there might be a need to kind of think differently about how your organization does what it does to ensure that your organization is best positioned to be able to effectively meet the needs of any new project or partnership in that same kind of regard, to be able to meet desired outcomes. So some benefits. There are many benefits to engaging in strategic planning. Namely, it really encourages organizations to be proactive as well as responsive. Oftentimes, we know how to be responsive. We know how to make sure that we get the thing done when we learn that there's a thing that needs to be done. But when we're thinking about what we don't know and the full breadth of things that we could be doing if we just take a pause, right? Press the pause button. That is what a strategic planning process really allows for the full organization to be able to do. And again, when thinking and talking about the full organization, we're not just talking about staff, we're also talking about the board. It also provides an opportunity to better understand the overall health of the organization. Now we can talk about kind of the financials, which is an important part in understanding the organization's health, but there's also the other part, which is how is the organization engaging community? What is the reputation of the organization when thinking about how the organization is in relationship to stakeholders, to funders, to the local legislative bodies, right? All of these things might be known to some, might be known in specific circumstances. The engagement in a larger strategic planning process does allow for better grounded understanding as to kind of what are all the ways in which, again, the organization can really consider its health. And then also supporting intentional and meaningful allocations of staffing, financial, and logistical resources. I feel like this is kind of self-explanatory, but really thinking more critically about, like, do we have all the people we need? Do we have all the things that we need? If we don't, what does that mean? What does it look like for us to build into a strategy to get what we need, to ensure that we hold on to certain staff, to ensure that we build into the kind of logistical infrastructure we need, et cetera. And then lastly, another benefit is just encouraging the monitoring of progress. Oftentimes we know we're doing a good job, we know we've accomplished the things, but we don't monitor. We don't necessarily have the data to back it up. And the strategic plan just allows us to be able to effectively say, we had this goal, we've had these strategies to achieve the goal, and in X amount of time, we were able to accomplish it and move forward this bigger objective. So of course, can't talk about all of the benefits without talking about some of the challenges. And I feel like we've kind of sort of touched on some of these, but when thinking about challenges, Some of them include limited staff time or resources, transitions, lack of buy-in or ownership of the process, poor communication, inability to track progress, and that goes to the last point here, and then also unrealistic goals or lack of focus or resources. So some common challenges that generally just pop up both within the process and also before engaging in the process. So I know I have taken up a little bit more time than I actually had. I tried to move as quickly as I could, but I think this is probably a solid place to pause. My understanding is that we'll be able to share the slides, and in the slides you'll see kind of a brief breakdown and overview of some things to consider when building into conversations within your organization around readiness to jump into a strategic planning process. So with that, I will pause here. We will take questions towards the end, and I will pass it over to Shauna to talk us through some pieces around partnership.
Oh, you're muted, Shauna.
Thank you, Heather. I didn't realize that. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Part of the reason why we have decided to have discuss this particular topic is because it's a new year. New Year's, we tend to do several things: come up with a new guiding word and come up with a resolution. So why not do this for our nonprofit organizations? Strategic plans, strategic partnerships, they can be a little overwhelming if this is something new to you. It could be overwhelming if you've been part of the process. What I like to ask nonprofit organizations, especially those with limited experience in this, and I do this not only for-profit businesses, but nonprofit businesses. It's called you can do it for like a one-page business plan, but you can also do a one-page strategic plan. And this is just so that you can get a quick and dirty idea of what your organization's needs are, how you're going to process through it, what are those resources, what are those milestones that you would like to achieve, and then build out from there. Some of the components you may want to include, of course, Kelly went over this. Of course, you have your mission, your vision, your goals, your objectives, your unique value proposition is another thing you may want to consider. What is it about your organization that makes it different from all other organizations out there? The second point I would like to make before I get into this presentation is nonprofit organizations are businesses, whether you want to believe it or not. The only difference between for-profit organization and a nonprofit organization is that the nonprofit organization benefits the public. So it doesn't have any shareholders where individuals can personally benefit, but a nonprofit organization is a business. So if you look at the nonprofit organization as for-profit organizations, you can easily borrow from some of the same strategies that they use. Okay, so let's talk about nonprofit organizations and strategic planning. So strategy and planning are about determining what's most important for organizations to do and figuring out the best way to get it done. For some organizations, the best means of getting this done is through partnerships with other organizations. So strategic thinking and planning, as what Kelly had gone over, can serve as a powerful moment for nonprofit organizations to identify opportunities to strategically align or restructure with other organizations. I also invite you to think of strategic partnerships as you do with relationships that you have. Some of the same ways you vet your friends, and your significant others is similar to how, in a way, you would vet a nonprofit strategic partner in general. So what is a strategic partnership? A strategic partnership is when a group of two or more entities join together to pool their common interests, activities, resources, and skills in order to promote broader goals and outcomes for the group's benefit and to achieve maybe social change. Think of it like this. Partnerships are relationships, collaborations are more so processes. So a strategic partnership that many of the attendees in this room have are with Gilead. Gilead can't do the work that these individual nonprofits do, but they have a mission, they have a vision, and they have goals. And in order for them to help advance their mission, they partner with nonprofit organizations to help them do so. Through their HIV/AIDS Positively initiative, Gilead has 23 grantees across the United States that they fund to do work with persons aging with HIV. And that is part of the program initiative or portfolio of Gilead. So all of these nonprofits individually and collectively have formed this strategic partnership with Gilead to help them fulfill their needs. So, and how it's mutually beneficial is that they have the support from Gilead, not only funding, but other support for them to affect change within their individual communities. Okay. All right, so why do nonprofit organizations form strategic partnerships? Well, in a nutshell, we do this to improve capacity at critical levels. So within members, you have associations like the American Association for Public Health, coalitions. We have a lot of community coalitions, collective impact collaborations, which work together to accomplish a shared purpose over time. So an association like APHA, they offer membership to individuals. And one of the things that they do is provide continuing education and professional development. So they have a common shared purpose over time to educate a group of public health professionals in various subject matter content. Within programs, joint programming include referral relationships. We have nonprofit organizations who are able to facilitate or offer their programs and services through mutual referral partnerships with an agency. So a nonprofit organization may have their members come from a referral organization so that they can have these support groups. Within relationships, shared services, and back office support, they're nonprofit organizations who share staff. It is very expensive to operate a nonprofit organization. So you may have a nonprofit organization who is partnered with another nonprofit organization so that they can share staff. Case in point, it could be administrative staff. This person allocates so many hours with organization A, and then another X amount of hours for organization B. But it sure is much cheaper to do that versus both organizations having full-time staff separately. They get to share those expenses for, and so forth and so on, so that they can add costs to other areas within organizational structures. And these are more so like nonprofit organizations where they merge, which does happen. We just may not see it a lot in our perspective field. So who do nonprofit form strategic partnerships with? And here are a list here, and this is just a general list that I provided. I encourage you to go beyond what is expected. The ones here are more so your traditional partnerships. I invite you to be very cognizant of news and trends that are out there. Whatever you see how the government is moving, and they'll drop hints here and there, If it's within your wheelhouse and there is a need, I guarantee you somewhere down the line, there's going to be a funding opportunity about it. I work with for-profit organizations as a consulting opportunities that I do. There is movement toward helping members of the LGBTQIA. Before, that wasn't necessarily on the radar of many for-profit businesses, but because we have individuals from various communities who are interested in starting these organizations, then there's a need for them to have services as well. So keep your eyes open to what is out there. You may not do formal evaluation and assessment to see that, but you can do informal observations. And that's just keeping your eyes open and your ears as well. Just being very cognizant of what is coming down the pipeline, understanding those trends, understanding the needs of your community. And it goes beyond these strategic partnerships that I have listed here, okay? So what are some common goals for collaboration? Leveraging resources, pursue joint funding, and reducing costs. For these three, you can kind of maybe pull these as like money items. So when you leverage resources, there is a mutual, where you have similar missions maybe. And that because you have similar mission, there's a mutual need and a mutual understanding, and therefore you can leverage those resources there. Pursuit of joint funding. Now that's been going on for a while, where nonprofit organizations, as far as funding sources such as government, corporations, and other businesses and organizations that provide funding to nonprofit organizations, where they have been almost begging to a certain extent for us to work with other nonprofit organizations. And what happens sometimes is we don't do that until the funding opportunity has language in it that says, well, who's your partner? Now you got to scramble around. Oh, where's that strategic plan? Well, we never did it. So this is has been asked by funders for some time. Not only that, with the pandemic, there has been funding that has become available, but more organizations have evolved since then because there's been greater need. But the amount of funding per se has not necessarily grown to accommodate that need, which means that we are being asked or encouraged to form these partnerships so that we can have greater impact when we work together as a group versus doing these things as silos. And I'm not sure why that started, but it still resonates today, where we have nonprofit organizations who like to stay where they are and not necessarily step out their comfort zone and form partnerships with other organizations. It could be that they think that the organization is going to infringe on their clients or customers, whatever the case may be, but we'll talk about how you can navigate around that in a minute. I know we kind of like pressed for time, so I'm gonna move on. Increase service impact. So if you have two organizations that are working together, you get to, hopefully, if you plan things accordingly, you have a greater impact in the community. So case in point, I started a nonprofit organization a little over a year ago, and it's specific to youth development with a focus on entrepreneurship. Now, the program, I had this in my head for some time, in which youth will be taught to develop websites for small business owners. So you get a lot out of that. Young people get a skill set, they get to give back to their community, and they learn about civic responsibility, and the small business gets to a website and get to increase their social presence and so forth and so on. And maybe even have another way of generating revenue because of that website. So I had an idea. I had a connection to youth, but I had no money. So what I did was identify a partner. Now, there are 2 historically Black colleges and universities in my town. I reached out, made a phone call to the business center, told them, look, I have an idea. I don't have no money, but this is what I want to do. That partnership has been made, and now young people will be able to have this opportunity who are who don't who are underrepresented in the fields of STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. So another way for collaboration is increasing visibility. You may have a smaller organization or a startup nonprofit organization who the individual, like the founder, may have credibility or experience, but the organization does not. So in these funding opportunities, you may see where, or these partnerships, the nonprofit organization will partner with a larger organization just so that they can get the experience and be within that umbrella of that larger nonprofit so that they can get that experience and hopefully those outcomes within their identified constituencies, and then apply for other partnerships or other grant funding opportunities, and even identify needs for other programming. And of course, professional development. I'm gonna keep moving. So situations where strategic partnership would not be ideal, where there's power imbalance, where one organization benefits more from the other. They see that this organization has a good bit of what they need. They may want to enter into this field, but they don't necessarily have the staffing or the experience in doing so. So they rely upon maybe a smaller organization. Smaller doesn't necessarily mean size, but it could be resources as well. But when that contract or that funding opportunity becomes available, then they take over and they kind of like push the smaller organization out. Another reason is when the organization there lacks transparency. So they come in presenting good intentions, but why they're wanting that partnership is not for a good reason. And then you have the partner, which is not listed here, which wants to win at any cost, and it doesn't care who it hurts along the way to get what they want. And that could be visibility, it could be funding, you name it. So partnership core values. Being fair and impartial leads to respect for the added value each partner brings. Transparency. So when you're clear about what each entity brings, their intentions and roles create trust with partners and facilitate opportunities for them to be more willing to innovate and take risks. As far as mutual benefit, when your mission aligns and there's mutual benefit and mutual needs, the relationship and its engagement is more likely to be sustained over time. Now, when you're looking at the relationships, you have this SWOT analysis, and you've probably seen this before. But when you think about the types of relationships you want to focus on, SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. You want to focus on, when you're looking at who you would like to invite as a strategic partner, on your opportunities and weaknesses. The threats, for the most part, tend to be those things that are out of your control, like environmental factors or political factors, those types of things. But opportunities, what are your goals? Are the demand shifting? How can they be improved? And as far as the weaknesses, what needs improvement? And are resources adequate to assist you in making those improvements? So when you're looking at your partnerships, you may be looking at these goals, and we talked about them before: leveraging resources, pursuit of joint funding, reducing costs, increasing service impact, increasing visibility, professional development, and training. So here are the steps that you can use to identify and acquire strategic partnerships. Discuss what your organization's needs are. Think about the benefit your organization could only realize by forming this partnership, and factor in the level of integration that your nonprofit needs and how long the partnership will need to last to identify the desired impact. Number 2, identify potential partners. Utilize market mapping. And some of this is what Kelly did not get to in that last chart. And landscape analysis to target the candidates with the best potential. You know how you have your manifest list, or you've heard of this manifest list. I'm going to manifest my partner, check he, she, they need to have this. Same thing with your partner. That's why I say some of these things are transferable when you're vetting. So what is their track record? Are they in good standing with the field? How are they viewed within the community? Do they have a wide range of contacts and influence? Do their skills and competency accomplish our nonprofit skills and competencies? Do they have sound management and governance structure? Are they financially stable? What about their staff? Are they having consistent staffing turnover? You want to map out the, number 3, the implementing challenges. Determine the impact of potential partners on your staff and leader, and consider the impact of your administration and systems. Gather any input from key staff to hear and address their concerns. We're at number 4, approach partnerships agreements with due diligence. And these could be like MOUs or any contracts. You need to be very clear about what your scope or your roles and responsibilities are. And it would be wise if you have several people to look at it. If you have a legal team, that's even great. Smaller nonprofits may not have this, but there are nonprofit pro bono organizations who would do this for you. I know in South Carolina, the University of South Carolina has a nonprofit organization track in which they have third-year law students to help nonprofit organizations with the legal documents. So there may be something like that similar in your state. Be adaptable during the initial implementation. So as with any relationship or with strategic planning, once you begin implementation, you may see that there may be a need to make mid-course corrections. And of course, you want to put some of this agreement in writing. And then lastly, for final considerations, you want to focus on what's important. Your partnerships and your strategic plan does not necessarily have to be for your whole organization. It could be individualized for your programs. It can be for funding, whatever that need is. Focus on what's important. Don't try to do everything at once, especially if you don't have the capacity to do so. Identify where enhancements need to be made. We talked about the SWOT analysis. What are the weaknesses and opportunities? And use your plan and strategy on an as needed basis, updated on an as needed basis. As Kelly mentioned, that plan is not for you to write and put off in in a cabinet somewhere or away where it collects dust, but it's really a tool for you to use and assess your work. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we're going to open the floor for questions. And thank you for your time too. Any questions? While we are waiting for questions, there is a link to the evaluation that we would like for you to complete. It's very quick. You can finish it within a few minutes, tops maybe 4. There's also a link for next month's webinar. We do these webinars monthly every 3rd Wednesday at 3 o'clock, and they last for an hour, and that's 3 o'clock Eastern time. And again, this presentation, the link will be sent, the Zoom link will be sent so that you can watch the replay, and we're also going to send the presentation for you as well. Any questions? And thank you all for the comments. We see excellent presentation. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm trying to see if there are any questions in here, and you can come off the mic if you want to. If there are no questions, we're going to wait about a few seconds. If there are no questions, yes.
There is a question in the beginning of the webinar on specifically on DEI and community needs. And the question was to just speak to that and a little more information.
Right. I tried to touch on that with strategic partnerships. And if she could, I believe it was Michelle Lopez, if you can come off the mic and elaborate more on what you meant by that, that would be helpful. And a DEI is just diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I touched base a little bit with that on the strategic partnership side. So hopefully her question was answered. If not, I invite her to come off the mic so that she can ask that question. Thanks, Jeff. Any other questions, comments? Okay, I guess we can give you less than 5 minutes of your time back. We hope to see you again next Wednesday, not next Wednesday, next month, the third Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern time. Hope to see you again. Be safe and take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.